Hi everybody, I'm Scott, and this is a PowerEdge T640 with an 18 drive capacity up front. You can see it's got space for 6 up here and then some blanks for 2 rows of 6 more below that. This is going to be my new backup server. This monitor shows that it's been under test for, this is bad to look at, 1 second. Well, it's still dim, but yeah, it's been under test for almost 24 hours. And that's because this is an eBay special. And by special, I mean, it's just fine. It's not like, I don't mean that in a negative way. Got it off eBay because it's a little bit of an older machine. I think the T640 has been around for a while, but this particular model is from 2021. So as of recording this, it's only about 3 years old, which actually makes it one of the newer systems I've had down here in a while. The reason it's new isn't because it's particularly great. It's only spec'd with silver CPUs, I think 8-core, 2.1 gigahertz. The CPUs aren't important because this thing is not going to be doing anything CPU intensive. If you couldn't guess from the front of it, it's going to be doing something disk intensive, and that is backing up. Because I said it's a backup server, and what do I mean by that? It's basically just going to be a file server, only it's not going to be accessible from the outside. It is only going to pull files into it from other servers for the purposes of backups. And it's also not going to reside in my basement. I have a closet upstairs on the second floor of my house that currently has 2 computers and a disk array. Yeah, there it is, kind of teetering on top of one of the computers. And those are both obviously home-built machines. They're nothing fancy whatsoever spec-wise. In fact, they're pretty awful, but they just have a ton of disks. Not enough disks, though. And that is the reason for this guy, because one of them is completely full on space and the other one's getting close. Yeah, as of right now, I have some video files that aren't even getting backed up, which I don't like. This guy will be paired with 18 drives. Oh, I should get the drives. Most important part of the project is the fucking drives, but I forgot them. These are the aforementioned drives right here. Well, it's a box. These drives were another eBay purchase, and right here we have 400 terabytes of raw storage in the form of these Seagate Exos, I'm assuming that's how you pronounce that, X22 drives, 20 terabytes apiece, and there are 20 of them. As I said before, this is an 18-bay chassis, so obviously that's 2 extra drives, but that's good because these were sold as refurbished, in other words, used. I don't think they're manufacturer refurbished, although they do look like they're in really good condition. And I got them obviously much cheaper than new drives of this capacity. So while it's a risk, I visited, that sounds weird. I found a couple of posts on Reddit about people who bought these drives or similar drives from the same seller who sells them in bulk, and they all had good experiences. This was on groups like Serve the Home and some other enthusiast groups, let's say, who generally know what they're talking about and probably wouldn't spam that for no reason. So yeah, hopefully these are okay. I'm going to test them out, obviously, before I put them in production. This is for a home backup server. That's why I put production in quotes. And I should note that most of the data that's going to be backed up to these drives is on this server right here and this disk array right here. And between the two of those, there's about 150 terabytes of storage that's in use. And even those are getting kind of full, so I'm probably going to be upgrading them soon as well. Maybe with more drives from this seller if they work out. So it's a lot of data, it's a lot of video files, and obviously with this much storage in the backup server, it'll be more than enough to back that up. And plus I have some other servers, disk images, database server backups, stuff like that, that are all going to go on this machine, as well as another off-site machine. I didn't mention the reason this is upstairs is in case the basement floods or there's a fire or something. At least presumably this server would be unaffected, being 2 stories up in a completely different part of the house. It's not a huge house, but still, it's at least out of the basement. And that's why I also have off-site backup servers, just in case the whole house burns down. I would lose some of my raw video files and some other stuff that's not mission critical or hyper mission critical, but most of my important data would be safe there and elsewhere as well. And I'm trying to get more serious about my backup, so not long from now I'll have a video featuring these backup tapes, because I have a lot of data that exists but doesn't change a lot, so I just want to back it up once, store it off-site on tape, and this way have a lot less concern about hard drives failing. So the first step before I can test all 20 of these drives, or rather 18 at a time, is to take them out of their baggies, put them in sleds, get the sleds, caddies, whatever you want to call them, loaded into the server. And I'm going to be running this. This has, I think, an H330, a PERC H330 card, which is a RAID card. I'm going to be using it in HBA mode. So these will just be treated as a JBOD, just a bunch of disks. And the OS will see each disk individually. So I can use SmartMon tools, check the status of these drives, see how old they are, see how many hours they have on them, etc. And the real burn-in test for these drives is simply going to be to create a RAID array. And I'm going to be using software RAID, obviously Linux software RAID. And that's RAID 6. Now, the thing I'm struggling with is it's a really bad idea to put 18 20 terabyte drives in one big fat array. And that really comes down to drive failures during array rebuilds. This is with RAID 6, you can withstand up to 2 drive failures before data loss on a 3rd drive failure. So you say, oh, it's no big deal. Take the drive out, the bad drive, put a new good drive in, starts rebuilding. That's great. The problem is that when you do that, it puts all the disks in the system under heavier than normal load, because this server is going to be under very low load normally. If a disk is going to fail, it's probably going to fail under load, especially at higher temperatures when the entire drive cage gets a little hotter from all these drives working. Not working their asses off, because, you know, they'll be reading. Anyway, the point is, whole thing gets warmer, drives work harder, another drive is more likely to fail during the rebuild than at any other time. And besides, there's just a certain probability that drive will fail at any time. With a 20 terabyte drive to rebuild, assuming a 100 megabyte per second, let's say, of data streaming into the drive. So let's say that's 100 megabytes per second going into the drive. That's a gigabyte every 10 seconds, a terabyte every 10,000 seconds, and 20 terabytes every 200,000 seconds. A day is 86,400 seconds, so it's going to take 2.5 days, call it, under optimal conditions, to rebuild one drive in the array. The second drive goes bad, you replace that in the middle of the rebuild, it's probably going to slow things down overall. So you're probably, I mean, in theory it might not, but it probably will. So then you're talking even longer to do the second drive rebuild while the first drive is still rebuilding. You're putting the whole array under load for even longer. Another drive failing is a definite possibility. The question is, do I split this up into 2 9-disk arrays, or just go for the gusto and do one big fat 18 drive RAID 6 array? It's inadvisable, but the difference is, of course, with 2 RAID 6 arrays, you have 2 parity drives. 2 more parity drives than you would otherwise, which is 40 terabytes of less usable storage. To put another way, with an 18 drive array, you have 2 parity drives and 16 data drives, which is 320 terabytes of usable storage. It's less when formatted, but let's just say for round numbers, about 300 terabytes of usable storage. If I split it up into 2 9-disk arrays, that's only 14 drives of data total, which is 280 terabytes. Call it 260 formatted, maybe 250. So, yeah, it's really, do I want to lose that extra 40 terabytes of storage? I'm thinking I'm going to take the risk, and that's only because I wouldn't advise you do this necessarily. The only reason I think I'm going to take that risk is because I have an offsite backup server. My main servers are all at least RAID 6. I have RAID Z3. I'm using ZFS on the server behind me. So it's really only in the event of catastrophic failure, and plus, I'm going to be doing tape backups and storing the tapes securely offsite. So I'm not super concerned about having this fail contemporaneously with the catastrophic failure of the server down here. Anyway, I'm still on the fence. We'll see. At first, I'm just going to put 18 drives in here. We're going to test the 18 drives. I'm going to build an 18-disk RAID 6 at first, just to burn in the disks, because that array rebuild will take quite a lot of time and work the disks pretty thoroughly, and then run some tests on it. Ugh, man, 400 terabytes is heavy, though. Oh, and with software RAID, an 18-drive RAID 6 or 2 9-drive RAID 6s, But one thing you might notice as a problem is that with the 18 drives, I'm not putting the OS on those disks. Those are just going to be data drives. There are internal USB ports in here, I think. I actually don't know. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter if they're internal USB ports. I have booted servers like this off of USB sticks internally. I like to have all my disks externally accessible, both for ease of swapping out and just to see the little blinking lights. It's a thing I have. So you might notice there's a 5 1/4 drive bay up here. Unfortunately, unlike Dell 740 XDs, and maybe even some regular 740s, this does not have any drive bays on the back. I don't think you can even spec that with their tower line. So what I did get is an IcyDock drive cage, which holds 6 2.5-inch drives. It comes with a couple of fans on the back, and it fits into one 5 1/4 drive bay, which non-coincidentally is of course what we have up here. It's meant for an optical drive. When you order it from Dell, that's usually what they would throw into that slot, but this will go in there instead. And this is nothing fancy. There's no active electronics in here. It's just a pass-through. It has 2 SATA power connectors in the back. I think it's just connected like one of those for each triplet of drives on either side. And as you can see, it has 6 SATA ports. So those are just pass-throughs. There's just a dumb backplane back there. The only other thing you might notice is this switch labeled HLA, which I believe is the fan mode switch, high, low, or auto. I'm heavily considering just taking these fans off completely, because as I'll show you later, inside the chassis of the T640, there's a fan right behind the 5 1/4-inch drive bay that should pull air through this, at least relatively nicely. And I believe I'm only going to use the middle 2 bays for the 2 OS disks. I don't think I'm going to use any other drive bays in here, so those will have decent airflow and a good amount of air gap between them and any other surface in here. And plus, they're going to be used like almost never. You know, like some log files are going to get written to them, and they'll really only get read from when the thing is booting up, which will be extremely rare. So these SSDs are not going to get a lot of use. So I don't really care about thermal properties too much. And just in case you're curious, here is... Actually, it doesn't have the model number, but that's what I got anyway. There's no model number on here. And I was just assuming that is fan speed, high-low auto. Yeah, high-low auto. High is 100%, low is 60%. And auto is the fan will start at low setting and increase its speed depending on the hard drive temperature. Well, who's putting hard drives in this nowadays? If the hard disk drive exceeded over 40 degrees centigrade, room temperature 25 degrees, the fan will increase its speed to maximum. I don't know where the temperature sensor in here would be, but like I said, I think I'm just going to omit the fans entirely. That's because these do not look like particularly high quality fans, so they're likely to stop working anyway, or at least make annoying noises eventually, if not immediately. And noise is another thing that highly recommends this chassis. I ran it through that memory test even under load. Super quiet, quieter than any of the servers behind me in that rack. And I've used, this is my first T640, but I've had a can you see it behind me? No, it's at the top of this rack. It's not in use right now. Is a T620. I had T710s before that, and even a T605. Point is that the tower servers are generally much, much quieter than the rack servers. And that's by design, because these are really for a more small to medium-sized business market, where they might not have a dedicated data room or even closet, and this might be in the same room as employees, so it's highly desirable for this to be nearly silent. I mean, for those of you that are really particular, that want like a 0 dB gaming chassis, this wouldn't satisfy you. It's not like completely silent, but it's got, you know, these are bigger fans than you would find in even a 2 rack unit server. And they're just a bit chunkier as well, so they can move more air at a lower RPM. Yeah, a lot of fan blades. And, well, this is what they look like. Actually, what manufacturer is this? Oh, Foxconn. And even for server chassis, fans do make a huge difference. The big file server back the big file server back there. It's a super micro chassis. The fans it came with were super loud and annoying. I think they're even a little smaller than this. They were like the size of fans you'd find like a 2RU system, because it's basically 2 rack unit systems kind of stacked on top of each other in one shell. More or less. Anyway, point is, fans were super loud and annoying. I replaced them with this brand, which I can't remember, but this is, yeah. And I didn't modify anything in the BIOS, didn't modify anything in the fans. It was just a different brand, different model of fan, much quieter. I mean, like, probably makes 20% the noise it did originally. But airflow is still good. Temperatures didn't go up. And manufacturer, I had that experience with a Dell server as well. It shipped with some other brand of fan. I replaced it with Delta fans that were actually spec'd by Dell. They even came with the right pin out and the right connector on it for hot swapping. This was in an R905, I believe. And again, made the system much quieter. It was just a different brand, different manufacturer, different blade design. Made all the difference in the world, even though they were also official Dell replacements. So manufacturers tend to swap out fan brands. So I've seen a lot of arguments online. Like, people are like, "Oh, that server is super loud. It's very annoying. I don't know how you can say that's a quiet server." And someone else is like, "No, I have one. It's super quiet. It's great." And then they chalk it up to a disagreement usually about like what each person thinks quiet is. You know, is a quiet machine 30 dB? Is it 40 dB? Is it 50? Like, what, relatively speaking, what do you consider quiet? I have a suspicion that sometimes they're buying the same exact model of server, maybe even the same year of production, but they came with different fans, and they make a huge difference. So if you got a noisy server, before you go to any crazy modifications, check eBay. See if you can find some other brands of fan. You can usually get them pretty damn cheap if they're used. You can test them out for yourself. Yeah, obviously I don't know offhand which fan's the best and which are not, but yeah. And probably even model to model from the same manufacturer might make a huge difference. I'm not a fan aerodynamicist, but I know from empirical experience it makes a huge difference. Rant over. This chassis was nice and quiet enough for my purposes. We'll see, though. We'll see when it has 18 drives spinning up front, generating heat, and that heat being sucked through the chassis. We'll see how much more those fans spool up and how much louder it gets. I have a fairly high tolerance for noise, if you couldn't tell. Let me turn off the noise reduction on this microphone. That's what it sounds like down here. And I work down here and do all sorts of crap. That's why my voice might sound a little funny, because I got to use a shit ton of noise reduction, even though I'm using the right mic for the job. That's why I have this mic, I don't know, 2 centimeters from my face, or from my mouth hole. It's on my face. My mouth hole. Who the fuck calls it a mouth hole? It's like 2 centimeters from my mouth. So obviously that will be the loudest noise it picks up. Background noise will be much quieter relative to my talking at this distance, because most of the noise is coming from 10, 12 feet back there. The point is, still too loud down here. But not for me. I don't mind it, as long as I'm not trying to record a video. That's not an H330. I think this might have an H740p in it, actually. Alright, so now I guess I'll put the drives into Caddies, into time-lapse, and you guys call them Caddies, trays, or sleds. I usually call them Caddies, even though I don't think that's the correct term, because I like CD-ROM Caddies from back in the day. That's my earliest like memory of referring to something like that, so I call them Caddies, but trays, sleds, whatever. Point is, the server did not come with them, so I'm hoping I have 18 of them that fit the style chassis. I'm pretty sure I do. And weirdly, the T640 uses the previous generation style of trays, even though the R740s I have use the newer style of tray. Don't know why. So I need 18 of these guys. At least I'm 90% sure I need 18 of these guys. Yes, 18 of these. Oh, that's 1, 2, 7. That's actually just about perfect, I think, because I think all I got is these 7, but I have one more trick up my sleeve. I'm just whipping out my cell phone for simplicity, and oh boy, does not like my fancy blue lighting. That's not my label. This is how it came from an eBay seller, but Not using this chassis right now, and it's got 12 trays. Perfect. And this is a DR4100, in case you're curious, which I think is a R730 XD, pretty much. Woohoo, and that's 12 more. Okay, so that's actually 19 right there, but this way, I know I have some, let's say, not actual Dell, knockoffs from eBay floating around in here. And those, I had a bad run with those, where the spring that retracts the button had a clip that would snap off, and then the button would never retract and would just stay down, and this thing would just flap like that, and you could kind of cajole it back into place, but that was a pain. So if any of these are defective, at least I have one extra. And some of them are a little dusty. Some of these were used in my home environment. Obviously not the ones from that server I just took them out of. Those are pretty clean. So that's good. Oh yeah, I need screws as well. Fortunately, I have a relatively comprehensive collection of screws from over the years. And I think, yeah, I bought a bunch of these in bulk for mounting 3.5-inch drive to sleds. These are the kinds with the fluted heads. Nope. Oh, those are Visa mount. Standoffs. I was hoping that I had more. I got more down there. I could probably pick through it, because I don't think this is going to be enough. I got 18 drives times 4 screws a piece is 72 screws, and that does not look like 72 screws. It says 424 times 3.5-inch, but I don't think this bag is full. I think I've already used some of these. Anyway, come on, Scott. Let's get this over with. In a time lapse, you're probably going to see me putting 3 screws in each tray. Because, look, this isn't an enterprise environment. I don't give a crap. As long as you have 1 screw and 1 screw on the end where the connector is, by and large, it's going to be fine. I'll put 3, 2 on this end and then 1 either here or here. And that'll be more than enough to hold the drives and whatever. Oh, and I almost forgot. Another thing you're going to see me do is label the drives. Because I'm going to be using software RAID. The LED indicators on the front of the chassis are not going to tell me which drive's bad if a drive goes bad. I'll need to determine that through software, and I'll need to either look for the serial number of the bad drive or see which serial number is absent from the list of drives, or, whatever. You can see here, these are both software RAID arrays. Actually, so is this one. And yeah, those are the drive serial numbers. Really handy when replacing them. I mean, another way to determine which drive's bad is just to use the array and see which activity light is not flashing. And that's probably your bad drive. But only probably, so you're better off knowing for sure. Interesting. These say date of manufacture 26th of September 2023. This video is being recorded in May of 2024. So less than a year old, or at least that's probably the refurb date. But still, that's a good sign. I've actually had in my life very good luck with refurb drives from both Western Digital and Seagate. In fact, I found that Seagate refurbs tend to not fail, but Seagate regular drives do. And I know we can argue about which is better, Western Digital or Seagate. Personally, and Backblaze statistics back me up on this. Generally speaking, Seagate's consumer low-end drives are much worse than Western Digital's drives. That being said, Seagate's enterprise drive line, which I think these are, is usually, in my experience anyway, top-notch. But all I can say from my personal experience, and you could argue this all you want in the comments, in my entire life, I've had many more Seagate failures than Western Digital failures, even though I prefer Western Digital and usually buy those. So in other words, I've owned more WD drives, but have had more Seagates fail. In other words, I've done more Seagate RMAs, or just, throw them in the trash, than Western Digis, even though I've had a lot more Western Digis over the years. And HDST, also really good, both before and after the Western Digital acquisition. So the way I like to label them is On the first line, I put 20 terabytes because eventually, years and years from now, 20 terabyte drives might be harder to get than like 22 or 24 terabyte drives. So I might have a mix of capacities, even if I'm only using 20 TB per drive in the array. And then the serial number is pretty short, so I'm just going to put the whole thing on 2 lines. And then the only irritating thing is this label maker does... Look, it's my favorite label maker, or at least these are my favorite labels, but it does waste a lot, and you can't control the margins. You can't control how much extra it extrudes, unlike some other label makers, which are a lot more generous with the amount of label you actually get to use. So I got to cut off the extra margin, make it small enough to fit on the drive tray, and then they're oriented like this in the chassis, so that is going to go roughly there. And obviously I don't care about fitting it within the margins of the original Dell label. Like, no. I want a nice, big, illegible marking on there, even though it got a little fucked up there, but whatever. I usually just do a quick double check. ZX20YEHZ, ZX20YEHZ. Because if you get it wrong on the label, that can cause real confusion when you're going to replace it. Not the most ergonomic way to do this, but... And voila! Only 17 more to go. Populating a large array like this and having to put all these drives into Caddies is both something I dread doing and something that I sort of weirdly enjoy doing. It's like very calming, very zen, relaxing in a way. So yeah, let's skip to the time lapse and some music and be done with this in a jiffy from your perspective. And that's the last one. How long did that take? I don't even know. It's on the screen though, because the video is keeping track. Well, it's not the best view in the world, but let's at least see the last one. Ah, that's satisfying. Okay. So now we got 18 discs. Obviously, I got 2 more drives down there in that box. Those will be spares. I'll test those in a separate enclosure like a USB. You know what I mean. Anyway, it's already getting kind of late here. I really just wanted to get these drives in the system so I can get them testing overnight. Like I said, testing is just going to be building an array. So I'm going to boot off of a live version of Ubuntu off this USB stick, configure the RAID array, like I said, all 18 disks, get it set up as RAID 6, and get it started building. And just leave it overnight. Tomorrow, I will put in the OS disks, show you around the inside of the chassis in case you're curious, and shit, one more thing. Oh, we'll test power consumption. I didn't test it beforehand, which is probably dumb, but what I can do is just sort of like, you know, half pop out all the drives, just pull out like that, test the power consumption without the drives, then test it with the drives. So yeah, let's get this full booted up. Oh. You can't see it from your angle, but right, I took the side panel off. Oh yeah, what we gotta do is change this to HBA mode. And I'll have to set up the iDRAC later. But like I said, this is just to get the machine up and running enough to build a RAID array. and to make sure all disks are recognized, actually. Block probing did not discover any disks. Oh, actually, I remember reading online, somebody somewhere said that you need to cold boot the system in order to get the RAID controller to switch to HBA mode. I'm hoping that's the problem. I've pulled the power cables. Yeah, there they are. So let me try booting again. Oh, terminal, there we go. Ugh. Honestly, I don't really run Linux servers with a GUI, like, ever. So this is awkward. Yeehaw! Oh good, that is installed at least. Okay. S must be the USB stick, right? So, yeah, good. Okay, just want to make sure. Now, it's usually wise to partition the drives first, but since it's just for testing, I haven't decided what I'm going to do with this array ultimately. I'm just going to... I guess it doesn't matter if it's level 6 in that case, but whatever. Oh, whoops, that's supposed to be... I'm an idiot. Equals 18. Yeah. Okay, well, that's cool. I mean, I guess this resolution is good for video, so you guys can read this, but man. Okay, 0% complete, clean resyncing, 16 devices. By the way, this is just in... The difference between these two is whether you consider a kilobyte to be 1,000 bytes or 1024 bytes, and so forth, all the way up to terabyte. That's why those numbers are different. But it represents the same amount of bits, ultimately. Well, this is going to be useless at this resolution, right? Yeah, because it's cutting off the freaking percentage. Well, that's not so bad then. And then I will just leave this up all night. Just for the record, it is... Oh, good timing, actually. So I started that at just about 3 a.m. You can see the system time says 7 a.m. on May 19th. It's 3 a.m. New York time, May 19th. Obviously, I didn't set up the time zone on this correctly. Anyway, so yeah, I'll just leave this server running overnight, and we'll see how far that gets in the next 10 to 12 hours or so. Oh, and I almost forgot, blinky lights. Ooh. Ooh. I'm looking at a screen over there. That's why I'm... Yeah. Yeah. That's very nice. So until tomorrow, I've been Scott. I'll still be Scott tomorrow. I don't know why I said that. Bye.
Some time has now passed.
Just a quick update here. You can see the LEDs are still blinking. It's been, I think, 23 hours since I started the array build, and it is 48% complete. So we're probably looking at about 2 days, full 48 hours-ish, which is actually a little faster than I thought it would be, which is nice. Let's go 10. Oh my god. There we go. So yeah, it's writing at about 110 megabytes per second. So yeah, a little faster than the 100 megabytes I gave it credit for originally. So that's cool. I kind of just wanted to check the performance of this operation. And by the way, that's 110 megabytes per disk, which is about 2 gigabytes per second. front through the HBA, which is really good. That's like 16 gigabit. What kind of load is this putting on the system? 100% CPU. So it's CPU bound, but it still seems like it's probably maxing out the disks as well, which is kind of improbable. But well, anyway, just want to take a look at that as it's going. I'll check back in either tomorrow or probably the next day, because it should finish about 26 hours from now maybe, and it's going to be super late at night then. So once this is done, we'll take a look at the chassis itself, install the OS disks, install an OS, and get it actually syncing the files from the server. Oh, the other thing I wanted to see was forgot. Oh yeah. Yes, that is one of the discs, obviously. What is it, dash A for everything? Yeah, that's what I wanted. Ah, frig. Well, that's not good. Alright, well then, if that random-ass Reddit post I just looked at is correct, then it's actually 0. Yeah, I knew this thing with Seagate drives. Okay. Yeah, okay. Okay. Cool. Now, these are refurb drives, so who knows what their situation was before. I assume this was factory reset. I mean, the 28 hours is probably just me. I'm assuming these came with 0 hours on the clock. So, yeah, okay. We'll just stick with that. I'm back. It's been a few days because I got busy with work and, real life stuff, but the array did finish building successfully. The drives seem to be fine. Still not seeing any smart errors. Everything looks great, so fairly confident these drives are good drives, but only time will really tell for that. Alright, get the keyboard and stuff out of the way, and then install the SSDs in the 5.25 inch drive bay in the IcyDock, whatever it's called. Oh, and to go into this enclosure, I just got 2 old SSDs I haven't been using for a while. This one's 250 gig, and this one I think is 120 or 128 gig. It doesn't matter if they're different sizes. I really don't need more than like a couple of gig for the OS partition anyway. So, because I'm just going to run these in software RAID 1, and I'll just create a 120 gig boot drive. The various partitions, boot partition and the OS partition. And I guess swap too. Why not have some swap, even though it doesn't matter. This enclosure is metal, by the way. It's not a plastic shell, which I like a lot. And it kind of clicks in the front. Like, it's got these 2 little pins that go into the screw holes on the bottom. And then by the connector, that's for 2 actual screws goes. I guess I'll use the included screws rather than digging into my own stash. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. One thing I'd like to do is get the serial numbers off the drives, just so if they do die and I have to replace one of them, I know which is which. I mean, I could just label one SanDisk and one PNY, and that would probably be enough. But, by tradition, I go with serial numbers, so I'll stick with that. And you know what? I'm actually going to print 2 copies of each, because the drives are going to be obscured on the bottom by the case. So this way I can put one label on top of the disc and know which is which. Because I do want it to be able to fit on the front of one of these bays. And that's kind of silly. Yes, I'll use that as the top label for it. I'll cut it off to, I'll eyeball the same amount of digits as that one. Hey, I got the same amount of digits. Well, roughly. I mean, the font spacing's it's not fixed width font, so who knows? And now I don't care about these SSD specs in particular. I'm not concerned with performance, because this is just going to be used to boot and write a few small log files to. I'm more concerned with reliability, and of course with SSDs, long-term reliability comes down to write cycles, but these drives are also not going to be written to a hell of a lot, so it doesn't matter if they're a little old and used. I mean, they've been gently used. I don't think these are strongly used drives. But the point here is just reliability from having your RAID 1, just in case one dies of random causes, not so much due to fatigue. And there we go. Now, I'm not going to apply the label to... Well, actually, you know what? I will, because I'm not worried about... Well, no, it's going to make this not pop out easily, because it's thicker than this, and it'll obscure the drive LED. I'll put this on the drive bay below this one, because I'm only going to have 2 drives in this enclosure. Yeah, why is it like sticking out? Maybe I should have... That's as far back as the drive will go in the sled. It's still proud of the ones without drives in them, but I guess those can just sink deeper. I don't think that's a problem. As long as it's seated in the connector, that's all that really matters. I'm such a spaz. I put the label on the wrong... I had it upside down the whole time. I wonder how many of you noticed that. Like, could I have just edited that part out? And then no one would ever know? Who knows? Now, of course, if I was fully populating this unit with drives, it would be a bad idea to label all of them this way and block up all the airflow. You know, even if they're mostly going to be read drives, they still generate some heat. I think we'll still get some airflow off these top vents. Yeah, I'd probably figure out an alternate way of labeling. For example, I have an IcyDock enclosure similar to this behind me. Well, you guys can't see it, but it's right about there. Yeah, there it is. And as you can see, I just labeled all 6 drives next to the unit, and that worked out fine. Now, as for this, again, I'm concerned about the reliability and noise of these fans. So I'm thinking this Dell chassis has a lot of fans in it and has pretty good airflow front to back. And these drives are not going to be working terribly hard anyway. Ooh, those are some chewy screws. Those are not going into metal at all. I can guarantee these are going into plastic just from the feel of them. I'm not saying the whole thing is metal, but like, yeah, like this whole back plate from this seam wrapping around just to here is all plastic. Yeah, I mean, they don't feel great. They don't feel super cheap. Like, I'm not saying they're awful. I'm just saying that the Dell server has a whole ton of fans in it, and why not let them do their jobs? And the reason I'm completely removing the fans is just so that there's a bit more room for airflow without the fan blades obscuring part of that when they're not moving. So whatever airflow the chassis does pull through this, you know, it'll be easier to pull the air through, I guess. Also, it makes cabling a little easier because we don't have the fans right up tight next to those SATA connectors. I think it's the right move for this application. And of course, we don't throw out screws ever. And then these are presumably the screws for mounting it in the 5 1/4 drive bay, I guess. I don't know why there's so many screws. Wait, what does it think these screws are for? 10 pan head screws for device. Yeah, I guess they want you to put 10 screws to mount this thing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, there's 8, but oh, it says 2. Oh, I missed that. It clearly says 2 for spare parts. But still, I don't know who would actually put this in with 5, and these seem really short for getting past like the sheet metal of the case and then actually getting a bite into this unit. So I don't know, man. I'm just not going to use them. Oh my god, no. This thing's heavy now. I mean, it was slightly heavy before I put the drives in it, but now it's friggin' massive. But so I might, before I bring this upstairs to the 2nd floor, I might take out all the drives. I'm sorry my hands are so bright. Oh, actually, yeah, I'm sorry my hands are so bright, but I need to up the gain on the camera to make the interior of the chassis visible to you guys. Because obviously I have most of my lights on the other side. and perhaps unwisely not so many lights on this side, but you'll get the idea hopefully. So we got these PCIe card retention brackets. It's for tall cards so they don't rattle around. Not really necessary for me. Just I'll probably just omit those. All right, so of course up here we got the 5 1/4 bay, and this should be toolless to remove this front plate. Yeah, there we go. Basically, this is just a dummy bezel, like a drive bay cover, but really large. And as you can see, it has these screws that have a bit of a standoff of unthreaded length. And so we'll be using these screws to mount the IcyDock there. And so it's 2 on this side. Oh, and so it's 2 on this side and 1 on that side. And now these, interesting, but fortunate for me, these are the fine threaded screws, the type you'd find on like CD-ROM drives and stuff, not the old school 5 1/4 inch drive bay, like where they use the coarse thread screws. So, because fine head screws is what this uses. A fine thread, not fine head. Oh, that's why the screws were so short that it came with. These are too long. The problem is these are sort of specialty screws. Now you can use normal screws and just not drive them in all the way, but let's see if I have a shorter version of those exact screws. Yeah, I got more of them, but the threads look like they're about the same length. Yeah, they're identical. So, and I'm wondering if this one that I did put in is so long that it would interfere with this bottom drive bay. But I don't really care because I'm not using it. So the problem is these in the back are digging into the plastic bezel back here and might even, yeah, I don't think I can drill deeper because it might hit the side of one of these SATA ports. So that's not a problem. I mean, back in the days of mechanical hard drives or optical drives, you'd want to make sure that your drives are locked down in a fairly sturdy fashion so that they don't vibrate, which could cause problems. You want them really connected to the chassis quite sturdily. But with SSDs, I mean, who cares? They're not going to vibrate, and even the chassis experience vibration. Who gives a shit? It's not going to interfere with the operation of an SSD. In theory, it could shake a port loose or something, but let's face it, this computer is going to be sitting on a shelf in a cabinet, and barring any earthquakes, which we had recently in New York, actually, it won't be an issue. I know, I'll admit it's kind of a weird angle to show this to you, but yeah, there it is. It doesn't look half bad in the front of this chassis. And it is a bit loose, like it'll just wiggle around a bit, but it's not going anywhere. It's not like going to pop out arbitrarily because it's locked in by that screw being encumbered by this bracket. Now, as far as cabling goes, I think I could take this out with the fan still in it. Yep, these fans are modular from the air shroud, but you can just pull the whole thing out. That's basically the gist of it. Mostly guides air over the CPUs and RAM. But of course, there are 4 fans. In fact, we can take out this entire module. And that's what I was talking about when I said there's good airflow through the chassis, because it also has these 4 fairly beefy fans. We saw them earlier. And, oh, I should point out, airflow's that way. So when it's situated like that in the chassis, you can see this top fan does provide some suction through the 5 1/4 inch bay. Here we have the PERC H730, H740. Yeah, it's just sort of sitting in there. I don't think it's even Yeah, it's not even locked down by a bracket or anything, which is weird. I think this is missing something. We're discovering things together because this the fan shroud has this extra bracket coming up which holds the card in place. So the card is not just freewheeling in there. It's actually not prevented from going. Oh no, it is prevented from going up. There's a notch there, and then this lip holds it. Yeah, it keeps it up from against gravity. So great. So it has 2 SAS cables going up and over, and then onto the back plane over here, which of course holds the 18 drives, and I think has a SAS expander chip under this heatsink, and some beefy power cables going to it. Yeah. And I don't know if I mentioned, but this system did come with... it's overexposed. Damn it. It's a lot of focus, but 1100 watt PSUs. 1100 watts is probably overkill, even for 18 SATA drives. Maybe for like 18, 15K SAS drives or something, it would be appropriate. But, and these silver CPUs that are relatively low power, I think they have an 85 watt thermal design power. Yeah, so these aren't going to take too much power. The drives will take the most power out of the whole system, probably, but it's not going to be a lot. But better to have overcapacity on your power supplies than undercapacity is my feeling. So anyway, yeah, that's the inside of the chassis. This has 64 gigs, so it's got 4 16 gig sticks. And I guess just for completeness, the back of this is reminiscent of my Precision T7920, and most of that line, in that it has 4 PCIe slots here, then the usual ports and power supplies, and at the bottom 5 more PCIe slots. So dual power supplies, which for me is a must. I like to put 2 UPSs on any system like this. And also, obviously, in case one PSU dies. This came with a Windows 2019 server license, which I'm not going to use. Dedicated iDRAC port. I think this came with Enterprise iDRAC, which is not terribly important. 4 USB 3 ports, 2 USB 2s, I assume. 2 10 gig NICs. I don't know if it says gigabit there, but yeah, they're 10 gigabit. And obviously VGA and serial. Oh, and should point out these bottom slots are labeled CPU 2. I should imagine that means these would not be active without the second CPU populated. I've never bought one of these. I never bought a dual CPU system that didn't have 2 CPUs in it. So, actually, that's a lie. My NAS did, but that wasn't a Dell, and it didn't have the same PCIe configuration. So, yeah. Anyway. Alright, and finally, it's still really too dark to see it up there, but behind these SAS cables are 2 SATA ports. One's already populated with a cable that just goes to the optical drive bay. The other one's unpopulated. I'll obviously stick my own cable in there and wire it up to the back for those 2 drives. The only thing I foresee as being an issue is, do we have SATA power? Oh yeah, it's buried in there. I have zoomed us in. So yeah, there are the SATA ports up here. We have the other end of that SATA cable. And there is a... Man, that was really tight. There's a retention clip in there that was hard to get to. SATA cable's nice and long, and I see a power connector in there. There we go. Liberty. And does it have a little extra... It's only the one, though, of course, because this is only really supposed to have 1 bay. Oh, it also has a small optical drive power cable. This type. Yeah, it says in order to function properly, connect both 15-pin power connectors to the enclosure when using the device. If I put the drives vertically on top of each other, yeah, I probably could have got away with one, but you know what? This has an angled connector anyway, which isn't ideal for putting in there. So let me get a splitter. All right, I've got a lot of SATA cables in my SATA cable bin, but here we go. It's a male to two females. Voila, and then I'll just sort of tuck this all neatly up in there eventually. Yeah, it's a locking connector. That's cool. It's longer than it needs to be, but that's okay. It can just sort of curl up in there. You know what? It's an absolute nightmare trying to get my big fat hands in there. So since I got plenty of slack on these cables, I'm just going to connect them outside the chassis and then slide it back. And it doesn't matter which SATA connector goes to which drive, but I am going to put HDD, it's labeled ODD0, which is the blue cable on the left side when you're looking at the chassis from the front. And that's just for my own neuroses. And I guess technically it'll help with troubleshooting or something. Yeah, it won't matter. It won't matter at all. Anyway, there's all the connections made up to the back of this unit, all the connections we're going to use anyway. And then just gently guide the cables out of the way and click. A lot of people would absolutely despise this mess and not be satisfied with it. At least for now, I'm going to leave it like that, make sure the front drive bay works before I try tucking all these out of the way. And to be honest with you, I'll probably leave it like this because it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. There's still plenty of room around these cables for airflow. Like, there's not a high density of cables there. So air's still going to be able to flow through this just fine. I'm sure a lot of you are screaming at the prospect of it being left in this state, but I kind of like that idea of someone out there fiending over how awful this is, and yet it working reliably anyway for years and years and years. Because what is literally going to happen inside this chassis with all these messy wires if no one disturbs it? And I'll be the only one who could possibly disturb it. Ooh. Oh, I'm a dumbass though, because this does have to be tucked out of the way. At least this cable does, for the fan shroud to go back in place. Because of course that's the other thing we need to ensure, is that none of the fans get fouled on loose cables either. Like, that can be bad. That can be operationally problematic. And I'm half kidding, because that is why you want to keep your cables neat inside your chassis, amongst other reasons. Anyway, let's see. Yeah, that's got to go up and over. Yep. Not pinching into cables. None of the cables are anywhere near the front of the fan, which has this guard on it anyway, so wonderful. Oh, I'm an idiot. This card is retained by the fan shroud. And so thus concludes my physical assembly and RAID array build of this 18 drive times 20 terabyte massive beast of 360 tera of raw storage. Will be less once I decide how many parity drives I'm going to have in total. In other words, how many arrays I'm going to have in total, because it's going to be running RAID 6 in either case. And yeah, the rest of it is just going to be loading an operating system on it. I might just use Ubuntu. I'm not sure, just because of long-term support and it's just well supported and reliable. And what I need ultimately from this machine is reliability. I'm going to do a minimal install, no GUI, nothing fancy. And the only things really loaded on this machine, other than the really minimal OS and tools, is going to be some scripts that I've already written for my other backup servers. I'll just modify slightly for this one. And my backup strategy with these type of backup servers mostly consists of, as I said earlier, this is a client. It's not really a server, technically, other than SSH, which I have firewalled off, so only I can access it from one of my machines down here. Has a private key on my machine and a password, so it's pretty secure in that regard. That's the only thing this will serve. Otherwise, this is just a client. It has an SMB client, an NTFS, not NTFS client, an NFS client, and using rsync, it just synchronizes other servers, pulls its data down to it, sometimes locally, sometimes over a VPN, if it's a remote server that's backing up. And yeah, that's basically it. It's quite simple. The only couple of mildly interesting things the backup scripts do is they retain, for example, if I'm backing up VM snapshots, especially from off-site, it will retain the last however many X number of snapshots. I usually have it set to 30, so it has 30 days worth of snapshots of remote machines, or a couple of local machines too, actually. And those are just gzipped raw disk images taken from a snapshot when the backup begins. So it's kind of like backing up the machine in a crash state, but 99% of the time that's fine. I do also back up my databases and other important applications at the application layer. In other words, like I'll use MySQL dump to dump all the contents out of my MySQL databases, gzip those up, and also get those backed up to this and other backup servers. It's just much easier if, like, even though the machine is in a crash state, if I can restore the whole VM image rather than having to do a SQL restore, for example. The SQL restore might take longer than just copying over a gzip file to the local server and then unzipping that, and there you go. So it will retain a few snapshots of whatever information I'm putting on it. And for example, with my file server, at least for my main most important documents, my programming projects, video projects, that is the actual project files, not all the raw video, all of that also gets rsynced over to one of these servers. But then after it's rsynced successfully that night, it gets then gzipped, but not deleted, just gzipped as a snapshot of that data, and then that's stored in a separate directory on this same server, or on the same backup machine. The point of that being that this way, if I get some kind of horrible malware that either deletes or encrypts my files, and then rsync decides to, all these files are changed, and then sync over the encrypted files to the backup machine, well, that renders the backup machine kind of useless. So I have these, we'll call them snapshots, that they're just tar gzips of directory structures that are a point in time, and I retain 30 days worth of those as well. So yeah, if I go 30 days without noticing a ransomware attack, then yeah, okay, all those backups will be wiped out. But for my most important data, that's how I do it. I keep point-in-time backups, usually daily, for most of my important stuff. And less important, like virtual machine images, like some of my personal servers that I don't really modify or use that often, or change data on that often, those might get snapshotted weekly. Anyway, the point is, it's not fancy, but it's reliable. And so the reason for this giant-ass machine being in my house on a different floor is twofold. I mean, one, it backs up video files, which can be quite massive and be quite time-consuming to transmit over the internet, which is the other reason. The inverse of that is if I need to restore the files from this machine, when it's in situ upstairs, it's going to be connected via a gigabit Ethernet connection, but I could easily bring it downstairs and connect it to a 10 gigabit Ethernet connection for the restore. And I could even reconfigure this as a file server and then just access my files off of this machine and build a new backup server in the meantime. You know what I mean? It's good having on-premises backups like this just because it's much faster for restores. And that's, I would forewarn everyone, if your backup strategy is exclusively backing up to the cloud, you got to remember that in an urgent situation where you need to restore your data, if you have terabytes of data, how long is that going to take just to download, let alone like if it's application level backups, let alone to actually put those backups onto each server they need to go onto. Yeah, if it's going to take you a week just to download all the data, let alone restore it to various servers or whatever, even if it's just for home use, like if your entire video library is in the cloud and then you need like terabytes of it back for a project, you might have to wait a couple of days. I mean, depending on the speed of your internet connection. So I'd always recommend backing stuff up locally and remotely. Because of course, if my house burns down, if burglars actually manage to carry all this shit on their backs out of my house, which is, you know, daunting. I mean, it's daunting enough for me to manage all this stuff, but yeah, I mean, that could happen. So you have to be prepared for that too. So off-site and on-site backups, I think, are the best move. And the other thing about cloud backups is that they're so hard to verify. Like how do you know all your files truly exist on your cloud backup provider's hard drives? And they're not just showing you, you know, you might log in and see, here's a list of all the files you have backed up, and here's all the versions of all those files we have backed up. And oh, it's glorious. Look, the files, they're right here. But they could just be showing you entries in their database that don't necessarily correlate to any actual files on any actual file system anywhere in their data center. Like, not on purpose. I'm not saying they're a scam. I'm just saying you don't know how well their entire system is managed, really. Like, how often are they verifying the files that they're displaying to you that they have logged in their database of files are actually stored somewhere? Because I'm assuming they abstract their file information from the actual file storage, because otherwise I feel like it'd be a nightmare storing files on all sorts of different servers and all sorts of different disk packs, and then like trying to find them arbitrarily. Like, there has to be some centralized master list, which is probably not a file system. And anyway, even if it is a file system, how often is that file system's contents verified that it exists and is in one piece? You know, in other words, my point being, you could have a catastrophic failure and go, oh my God, I got to go to my cloud backup provider and get all my files. And then it could turn out that some or all of your files just aren't there, even though you thought they were. And even if every now and then you're smart and you go in and download a couple of arbitrary files here and there just to make sure they do exist, I mean, that verifies some of them, but you don't know that all of them exist unless you go and download all of them and look at them yourself, which could take days or weeks, depending on how much data you have stored and depending on the speed of your internet connection. So at least with this, first of all, I know how it works. I know there's no abstraction between like the file system and the files that are stored. I mean, there is internally to the file system, I suppose, if you want to be pedantic, but you know what I mean. There's not like a separate, like, I don't know, MySQL or CouchDB instance that's storing a list of files, expecting it to correlate with file systems on various servers throughout their data center. That's really what I'm talking about when I'm talking about abstraction in that sense. So I just feel more comfortable having my data under my control and me knowing exactly how it's stored and how it all functions end to end. It just makes me feel better. It's more of a hassle, definitely more of a hassle, and more expensive in the end. I mean, Backblaze, which is a backup provider I do recommend to friends and family, and I have used it for other purposes as well. I do like Backblaze. I particularly like their transparency and their drive stats that they publish. So yeah, this is not a paid endorsement. They didn't sponsor this video or anything. I give a crap whether you use them or not. But generally speaking, I do like them. It's just because they're a cloud provider, I don't trust them. Not because they're bad, just because they're not me. But anyway, the point is, Backblaze subscription would be far cheaper than what this server costs, and I'm pretty sure they offer unlimited storage to this day. So in theory, I could back up everything to Backblaze for much, much less money than this thing costs, and probably for less money per month than this thing will cost to run in utility bills, maybe. But then again, most of you probably don't need this kind of absurd level of storage. Honestly, if you want something low power and quiet, hook a Raspberry Pi up to a couple of USB SSDs and stick it in a closet somewhere. You know, assuming that's enough storage for you. It'd be dead silent, not use much power. It could do its thing. Same sort of setup architecturally as I have here. And you know where your data is. It's in your closet. And also off-site somewhere. I mean, back up to a cloud provider. For your off-site needs, back up to a cloud provider. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying make yourself more comfortable and also back up locally. And snapshots are very important because ransomware will murder you if you don't have snapshots, because otherwise your encrypted files will just get backed up. and potentially, depending on how you have your backups configured, potentially overwrite your existing backups, which is what would happen in my case if I wasn't also tar gzipping all those files nightly and storing them in a time-coded, time-stamped file for 30 days worth of files. And that's part of the reason why I need such a massive amount of space. I mean, right now I have approximately 150 terabytes of data here on the server behind me to back up, which even with 4 parity drives would fill up less than half of this. But there's a lot of overhead in that I duplicate a lot of that data by keeping all those snapshots. Anyway, I've done plenty of videos ranting on about backups for way too long. But thanks for watching. Maybe I'll post a follow-up to this once it's up and running. If I have any... You know what? If anything goes wrong, I'll probably post a follow-up video fixing this mess. But if everything goes right, then yeah. This is just replacing 2 of my current backup servers in that closet, which already have been doing their thing and running fine for, I want to say, one of the one on the top shelf has probably been doing its thing now for 8 years. I don't think I've upgraded that in a long time. And the one on the bottom, probably 5 years. And they just hum away and they do their thing. And those are made of very cheap parts. This, in theory, should last a long time, but we'll see. Anyway, I've been Scott. Good night. Why with the salute? I always, with the saluting, I always fucking salute. Does anyone mind the saluting? Like, should I keep doing that? That was more of a doffing of the cap. The fuck is... No, that's a salute. I did more of like a cap doffing. I never wear a hat. I don't know why I do that. Tip my fedora? That's more like this. You don't like... Do you tip your... Now I don't even remember. Do you tip your fedora this way? Or do you tip your fedora that way? Who knows? It's not even a thing. It's a meme. I mean, I think that fat asshole actually did wear a fedora in that meme for his own purposes. I shouldn't have said fat asshole. I'll have to beep that out. Yeah, you can't make fun of people on the internet anymore. Though, to be fair, it would be inappropriate to randomly make fun of people in a video about the fucking backup server, right? Okay, now I'm actually done. So stupid. Where the